Hi guys, and welcome to another video. This is the third part of a series of videos on must-have unRAID plugins. And in this part, we'll be looking at some really useful disk utility style plugins. So let's get started. Okay, so there's one thing that all of our unRAID servers have in common, and that is an array of disks. So it makes sense that we install some plugins that will help us use and manage these disks, yes? And the plugins we're going to be looking at in this video are the following. 1. The Unassigned Devices plugin by dlandon. And this is a useful plugin that allows us to add drives to our server which we don't want to be part of the array. And the preclear plugin by, I really don't know how to pronounce this guy's name, but I'm going to give it a go. I think it's gfjardim. I'm sorry if I've got that wrong, I probably have, but it's an excellent plugin by the way, and we use this to stress test our new drives to check for problems before adding them to the server. And thirdly, the unbalance plugin by Juan B Rodriguez. And this is a very useful plugin for moving and managing data between disks on your server. Okay, so I'm quickly going to head on over to the apps tab and quickly install those plugins onto my test server. Okay, so now with those plugins installed, the first one we'll look at is Unassigned Devices. And if you see here at the bottom, we've now got a section saying Unassigned Devices. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to plug in an external hard drive. And now with the USB hard drive plugged in, we can see it's listed here below. And if we click on this plus here, we can see the various partitions on the drive. And you can see here it's formatted in the Apple format, and if we click on here we can then see the files inside the drive. And one of the great things about Unassigned Devices is it will allow you to read and write to disks in all various formats. So basically pretty much any hard drive you attach to the server, you're going to be able to read and write data from it. And here we can set auto mount to be either on or off for this particular drive. And here we can click whether it exports this drive as a share or not. And you can see here now on my server I've got this extra share OSX external, and that's the external hard drive that's attached. So this is a really useful feature if you just want to plug a USB hard drive into your server and then it's shared on the whole network. Okay, so we can actually format disks and delete partitions in Unassigned Devices. If I click on mount here, at the moment if we look at the partitions, there's nothing we can actually do to it. So we need to adjust the preferences within Unassigned Devices. So go to Settings, then Unassigned Devices, and then you see here where it says Destructive Mode. Well, if we enable that and set it to Yes, then we can actually delete partitions and format drives. So with Destructive Mode active, let's go back to the main page and then look at our partitions on the drive. And now you'll see next to each partition we've got a red cross. So if we click into that and then we type Yes, we can then remove the partition. And now I'll just do the same for the remaining partition. So now with both partitions removed, we can now format the drive. And we have the choice of the following file systems: XFS, ButterFS, NTFS, ext4, exFAT and FAT32. And I'm going to choose ext4 for this drive. So then we just type in yes and then click format. And that will format the drive in our chosen file system. So what else can we do with Unassigned Devices? Well, we can actually add remote shares to our unRAID server from other devices on our local network. And this could be anything from a Windows share on a workstation, another NAS box, or even another unRAID server. So we just click on the button Add Remote SMB or NFS Share, and we choose the protocol. I'm going to choose SMB here, and then we can browse for the servers in our work group. These are the two servers I've got online at the moment, so there's my main server, and I'll load the shares, and we can choose which share that we want to use. And then just click Add. And now for it to be usable by the server, we just need to click onto Mount. But if we were to restart the server, because it's set to auto mount, this share would be remembered and mounted automatically. Okay, so if we're using VMs and Docker containers, how actually do we get to these unassigned devices? Let's just open a terminal window and see where unRAID stores these unassigned devices. And the location it stores it is /MNT/disks. So let's cd into that directory and then list the files that are there. And so there you can see the ebook share from my other server, that's here. So let's cd into that and then look at the files. And there's nothing much here, just a couple of Calibre libraries. So what we'll do next is we'll go across to the Calibre Docker template and see how we can add an unassigned device to a Docker container. Okay, so let's scroll down, and here where we can add the Calibre library, let's click on here and we'll browse through to the same location as we did when we were in terminal. And here it is, disks here, and you can see here's the ebook share, the unassigned device share. And now I can just add the Calibre library just by clicking it here. But there's one important thing to note. What we must do is click here on edit, and anytime we use a Docker container with an unassigned device, we must change this access mode here to be RW slave. And so that's how we use unassigned devices with Docker containers. Okay, so now let's look at the different ways we can use unassigned devices with VMs. And you can see here I've got an NVMe drive attached to the server as an unassigned device. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to format it in XFS. Okay, and as normal, to use this drive we're going to have to mount it, and I'm going to set it to auto mount. So now let's go across to our VM tab and create a new VM. And now when we set the primary disk location, instead of being on auto, if we set it to manual, and then again we're going to need to browse to our disks here, and then there's the NVMe drive that I've just attached to the server. So select that and then select a size for your vdisk. I'm going to use 100 gigs and then just click create. So now I've created a 100 gig vdisk on the unassigned NVMe drive. So that will give really good performance to this particular VM. And if we go back to the main tab here, and let's browse and have a look on the NVMe drive, we can see here now there's the folder created Windows 10 with our 100 gig vdisk inside. So if you wanted to store all of your VMs on this particular disk, then if we went to settings and then VM manager and click onto advanced, and we can change the default VM storage path. And you can see here for me at the moment it's set for a share called virtual systems. So now what we want to do is change it to the location of the unassigned device. And you see if I click onto here, we can't actually browse through to the actual drive. So the easiest thing to do is go back to the main tab and just unmount your drive and then click on the plus, and then if we click on the name here, we can actually change the name of the device totally. And I'm going to call it just NVMe and press enter. And now you can see the location is /mnt/disks/NVMe. So that's much easier to type in. So now let's mount the disk again and go to settings, and I'll go to the VM manager, and so now we just have to type that location /mnt/disks/NVMe and click apply. And so now when we go to create another VM, just click onto VMs and choose a template, and I'm going to leave it at 30 gigs and leave this as auto. And you can see here it says where the vdisk is going to be created. It's a bit light, this writing, I'm not sure if you can see it that well. So when we click on to create, that disk's now automatically being created here. So there's two ways that you can use vdisks on your unassigned device. Now you can also pass through these devices as a whole device to a VM, but that's outside the scope of this video. Now before we go on to looking at the next plugin, I just want to show you how we can actually run a VM with a vdisk across the network using unassigned devices. What we need to do is to add a remote NFS share. Now it has to be an NFS share, it doesn't work with Samba, and we add the share just the same as we did before and make sure that that share is mounted. And the share that I've connected to is the shared NVMe drive on my main server, which is also connected by unassigned devices and shared on the network. So let's quickly look at that on the other server. So this is the NVMe drive that's shared across the network using unassigned devices. Now what we'll do is go to the VMs tab and have a look at this Arch Linux VM. You can see here this is its disk location, it's on the NVMe drive, and it's just a basic VM with VNC graphics. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy all of the XML, then go back across to the other server and go to the VMs tab here, and I'm going to scroll down and then select a blank custom template and then paste the XML from the other server into here. And I'm just going to untick start VM and then click create. So there's the same Arch VM, but we're going to edit it and just change the location of the primary vdisk to be in our unassigned devices, so disks, and then here's the remote NVMe share and VMs, Linux, Arch, and then there's the vdisk. So then we just click update. So now let's quickly spin up this VM and check everything works. And the VM's loading up absolutely fine and running on a vdisk across the network on a share. Now if you're a beginner, that's probably something you won't want to use, but for the advanced user it can be an interesting use of unassigned devices. But next, a plugin that we should all use when adding new drives to our array, and that's the excellent preclear plugin. Now I've made a video before on how and why to preclear drives on unRAID, so you might want to check that out. So what preclearing does is it stress tests our hard drives before adding them to the array. When a drive is new, we want to test it in case there's something wrong, as it's better we know this during a preclear than finding out just after we've copied all of our data onto that drive and it's an active member of the array. So we can only preclear drives that aren't a part of the array. Also, if you want to preclear the drive, it can't be mounted, there must be an unmounted drive. Now there's a few ways we can access the preclear plugin. We can either click on plugins and then go to the preclear plugin here, or we can just click on tools and go to preclear and it will bring us to this same page. And here it just lists the various devices that we can preclear, and then we can just click on the start preclear to start preclearing drives. I'm going to cancel this and just go back to the main dashboard and show you another way of getting to the preclear. Now if we have the Unassigned Devices plugin installed, we can get to it through that. If you see here, there's a little icon next to the drive, and if we just click on that, it will bring up the window to start our preclear. And the preclear process, it basically consists of it reading every sector on the drive, and then it will write a 0 to each sector. Then finally, after it's completed this, it will read those sectors back again. And also during these stages, it will be making background operations to stress the drive a bit more, such as random head movements. And all the time, it will be making smart checks at the beginning and the end of each stage. So as you can imagine, this process takes a really long time. So just for this video, to make the process faster, I'm actually going to skip the pre and post reads and just zero this drive. So when you're ready to preclear the drive, just click start. Now remember, preclearing a drive will actually wipe it clean, so don't preclear any drives that you've got data that you want to keep on it. And you can see here the process of the preclear. At the moment it's on 0% and it's zeroing. We can see here it's writing at 104 megs per second as well. But if we click onto the little eye, we can see a little bit more detail. We can see things here like the elapsed time, the write speed or the read speed, and the average overall speed. And also we can see the most important smart information here. Now if you didn't have the Unassigned Devices plugin installed, then you wouldn't see the information displayed just here. The only place you'd better see it is by clicking onto the Tools tab and then clicking onto the Preclear disk icon here. Then you'll see the same information displayed in this section. Okay, so now let's fast forward a few hours and we can see it says the preclear has finished successfully. So let's look here and we can see everything's a success. The elapsed time was 3 hours and 4 minutes, but remember my drive was only a 1 terabyte drive that I pre-cleared, and I actually skipped the pre and the post read, so had it been a larger hard drive and I hadn't have done that, it would have taken considerably longer. So anyway, now this hard drive's pre-cleared, let's add it into the array. So let's stop the array, and now with the array stopped, we can assign the drive. I'm going to add it as disk 3, then start up the array again, and unRAID will tell us that there's no file system, so what we have to do is just format the disk, and unRAID will format the disk in the format that's set as the default in the settings, and now we're good to go. Okay, so now let's move on to the last disk plugin we're going to look at, which is the unbalance plugin. So to get to that, let's go to settings and then click on unbalance. Then we need to select enable unbalance server and change that to yes, and click apply. And now you can see we can open the web UI. Now there's one thing that I've noticed, that if we're accessing unRAID through HTTPS, then when we click on this here, then we can't access the unbalance interface. So what we just have to do is just actually put in the IP address of the server and then the port number of 6237. and then we get straight into the unbalanced web UI. Now what unbalance does is it moves shares from disk to disk. So let's just go back to our unRAID web UI first, and let's click onto shares. Now you can see here these are the various shares I've got on the server. Let's look at our media share for instance. If I view what's inside that, I've got 3 series here. I've got 12 Monkeys, Ancient Aliens and Band of Brothers. Now let's look at how those are on the disks. So let's look at disk 1. So if we look at the media share on disk 1, I've only got my Ancient Aliens show. And if we look on disk 2, I've got 12 Monkeys. And disk 3, I've got Band of Brothers. So what we can do with unbalance is I could move all of these files from disk 2 and 3 so that all of my media share is on one disk. So let's do that now. So the feature of unbalance we need to use to do that is the one called gather. So let's click onto gather, and then it asks us to select a folder. So the one I want is the media folder here, and it's telling us here that the media share is on disk 3, 2 and 1. So now we need to click onto next, and unbalance will check for any problems. And you can see here that unbalance says there's some ownership problems with some of the files and folders that we want to move. So it suggests that we run some new file permissions. So let's go across and do that. So let's go back to the unRAID web UI and now click on Tools. And you can see here we've got Docker Safe New Permissions. Now you'll only see this here if you've got Fix Common Problems installed, and you should have if you've been watching my other plugin videos. So what we want to do is just click on here, yes I want to do this, and then click Start. And this will give all new permissions to our files. Okay, so now let's go back to unbalance, and now we need to choose a target drive where all of this data is going to go. So I want all of my data to go into the first disk here. I want all of my media files to be here. So I'm going to tick this disk here. We have the option here to do a dry run, which is a test. But I'm not going to do that. I'm going to uncheck that and then click onto next. And here it's telling me how much data is going to be transferred. So I'm just going to click onto proceed, and it tells me here it's going to take about 5 or 6 minutes. And at the moment the speed it's copying at is 60 megs per second. Okay, so that's now finished. So now let's go back across to the unRAID web UI, and if we have a look here now, let's look in our media share. Now we've got all 3 shows here, and now we can see that on disk 2 and disk 3 there's nothing there. Everything's been collected onto the first disk. Right, so let's go back to unbalance and look at its other feature. And the other function unbalance will do is it will let us do the exact opposite. It will let us move data from shares on one disk and scatter them to other disks. So for instance, if I want to move data from this disk here, I can select all of the shares here and move them to these other disks. I'm going to move them to these 2 disks here. I'm not going to move it to the cache drive. And then we click on Plan. And we can see here it says planning's finished and there's no errors come up. So what we can do, we can either move the data or we can copy the data. Now normally it's best just to move the data, because obviously if you copy the data from disk 1 to another disk, then there'll be duplicated data on the array, and this isn't good. However, there are times when copying can be useful, and you can see one such use case using the unbalanced copy feature if you watch my other video on how to encrypt an existing array on unRAID. So anyway, for what we're doing here, I'm going to click on move and move the data across to the other disks, and it's going to move 92 gigs from my disk 1 onto disk 2 and 3. So let's let that finish and then come back to that later. Okay, it's nearly done now. Right, so that's all the data moved across now. So let's click back on the unRAID web UI, and so now we can see that this disk's empty here. It does say it's used 1 gig, but that's not actually true. If we look in here, it's actually empty, this drive, and all the data has been moved to the second drive here, and you can see the 3 shares are here. Now if we look on the third drive, this is also empty. Now I did select it to move data to the third drive, so why isn't there anything here? Well, it will only move data to the next drive should the other drive be full. So if my disk 2 had become full, it would have carried on moving the data over across onto disk 3, but it won't do that unless it runs out of space. So that's the unbalance plugin, and I think it's really useful. Now if you're new to unRAID, you may not have much use for this at first, but the more your array gets filled, then that's when this will come into its own. And if you're interested and want to see another great use of the unbalance plugin, then check out my next video when I convert my existing unRAID array to be an encrypted array, so check that out. Well, that brings us to the end of this third part of must-have unRAID plugins. I really hope that you found it useful, and if you did, then please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And if you really like what I'm doing and you want to help support the channel, then any donations are really appreciated, which you can do through the PayPal or Patreon links in the description or the channel homepage. Anyway guys, it's time for me to go now, but whatever you're up to for the rest of the day, I hope it's good, and I'll catch you in the next video.